Welcome back, or welcome if you just came in. I'm Squirrel Eiserloh. I'm not going to keep reintroducing myself. This is the second of 6 talks about procedural content generation that I'm doing today. This one's semi-procedural content pipelines. And it's going to be a little fire hose style because I have 15 micro ideas I want to give to you, and I have 30 minutes. I think I'll be fine. I think it's actually a pretty short talk. Okay, so an overview. I want to, again, as usual, state my motivations. What am I trying to do? What am I after? I'm going to talk about variants, blueprint definitions, procedural detailing, content injection, stitching, and a bunch of things. So, motivations. There are a million little cool techniques out there, and many of them have been around for decades. And I didn't hear about them until decades later. And probably you are the same. And I'm interested in this stuff. So I find that there are very few places that summarize all these things in a nice way, or at least in a simple way. So I kind of wanted this to be just a shotgun of ideas of a bunch of little things that I have liked and used and abused over and over the years that I found to be really useful, and maybe you will have some new ones to you. None of them are particularly rocket science, but I thought I would do justice by giving you a broad spectrum of them. And my goal here is, I call it procedural content pipelines, is trying to find ways of having the human author and the procedural algorithm work together, right? One influencing the other and back and forth. I think that's where most of the best and most interesting stuff happens. I think it's really easy as programmers in particular for us to get very excited and head down about I'm going to make this algorithm that's going to invent whatever, and I'm going to go off by myself in math land or in algorithm land or programmer land and kind of miss the forest for the trees and be all about the purity of the essence of the idea of me making something totally from scratch with just math and just code. It doesn't have to be like that, right? Humans have something to offer. And there are a lot of things that you could spend decades trying to make procedural algorithms generate that will never approach the human-generated content in quality, yet that doesn't mean we don't want to use PCG. So somehow there's a marriage between them. And these 15 ways are tiny little ways that they can interact, the humans and the machine. All right, so the simplest by far, and it's so obvious I hate to state it, is to use variants, right? So if this is a simple roguelike game, that's what my tiles look like, or I could make the tiles look slightly different. There you go. So now grass can look like 4 different shades of green, right? It's here you go. This is what dirt looks like. It can look like any one of these colors or any one of these colors. So this is really, really useful for sounds, for example. When I'm running across grass, instead of hearing crunch, 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 I want to hear crunch, 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 crunch. And I can pitch bend and I can volume change, but I may want to just have a list of 6 sound files to choose from, right? So variants. So whenever possible, let the designer provide multiple alternatives that the algorithm can pick from. And you have to be a little bit careful if you're generating, for example, tiles, let's say a Minecraft landscape, and you want to have different variations of the grass. That's cool. It's going to make it look more organic and less patterny. But you have to be careful about asking, well, is it important that I always pick the same variant for that particular tile? If I go off screen in Minecraft, I run away and I come back, and now I sort of notice that there was this this cloverleaf kind of pattern in the grass by my house. It's not there anymore because it re-rolled them. We can solve that with noise and some other things we'll talk about later. Blueprint definitions. Again, super simple. This is an orc. This is not an orc, this is orcness, right? This is the definition of what orcs are, and that seems obvious, but there's a difference between having a banana and knowing what a banana is. And this is the latter, right? So I'm saying orcs are like this. They are of the orc faction. Their names come from the syllabic goblinoid generator. And their heights vary from 170 to 190 centimeters. Now with that one little piece of code that can support that, so now the designer can input a range of numbers, and I roll randomly every time I instance a new orc. This one's short, this one's tall. Now I get an army of orcs all different, right? Some of them are strong, some of them are weak, some of them are more aggressive than others, right? So I come around the corner and half of them attack me and some of them hesitate. Some of them are maybe braver than others. I can even vary their skin colors, right? The tint of their skin on top of whatever the artist provided. So these are hue, saturation, value. This is like I want dull, low color, medium tone tints. So like a blah green or a blah pink tone. So now you have 1,000 orcs all acting slightly differently with different heights, with different arm lengths, and with different skin tones, et cetera, et cetera. And now they're starting to feel organic. And of course, don't forget your variants, right? We can have 3 meshes to begin with. So whenever possible, let the designer provide number ranges. Every time now I have data-driven stuff, which is like everything I do for me or for the designer, anytime I have a number that they're going to type or pick from an editor, it's going to go in a file that's going to get read in. I always ask myself, is this really an int or is this an int range? Is this really a float or a float range, right? Is this an RGB or RGBA or an RGBA range? And pretty much every type, I just have a template that does it, can do it. Procedural detailing. There's not much to say about this. So this is Unreal 4. You just put the important parts where you want and say, put grass here, and it does it, right? So that's a lot of work you didn't do. So procedural detailing for me is just the idea of, I'm going to paint the important parts. Okay, algorithm, you go fill in the boring parts, right? Boring because they're tedious, boring because they don't matter, but they need to be organic and varied, and that's lots of organic, varied, tedious labor. That's what algorithms are for, right? So whenever possible, let the algorithm do the dirty work. That kind of relates back to the recipes as well. Procedural brainstorming. This is a pretty simple idea, right? I can have maps that are generated. Let's see. So I can generate different random maps. I'm like, oh, that one's pretty cool. So I'll generate a map, and then I'll take that content. Thanks, I'll take it from here, and then I'll hand paint over it, right? Or I'll load it into the editor, and I can mess with it. So it's a really nice way to either jumpstart your content, right? Just like, no, that's not good. Oh, wait, that last one was cool. There, 3 lakes, I like it. And I now have an idea. I want to change the houses and move it around. So you can let it jumpstart and give you ideas. Also, I could like take this and then, figure out I want some lava to go here and edit it from there. So yeah, procedural brainstorming, just like try things until you find one that you like and then make use of it. So whenever possible, let the algorithm spark your creativity. And I know so far none of these are rocket science, and spoiler alert, really none of them are rocket science. But I'm shocked, both at myself and at everyone else, just how often we don't do these things, right? How many times did you not make it so that I can make comma-separated things and list multiple sounds? How many times did you not offer me an integer range? Content injection is pretty simple. It's the idea that we're going to randomly generate some stuff and then handcraft a few items, and then we're going to sort of shove those in, right? Inject the hand-authored content into the procedural content. So in this case, I have this sort of palace thing that got injected in different ways into these 4 different maps. That was hand-painted. It has little lava inlets or something and a grass lawn in the middle. So I can make things as specific and as pretty as I want, especially if it's a narrative important piece, or I want to have a boss battle that I really control the conditions for. But it's in a bunch of caves with lava. You generate the caves, and then I'll just shove my beautifully handcrafted temple in the middle of it. I don't have to handcraft everything or nothing. By the way, there's other hand-injected content in here you probably didn't notice. These are all instances of this other little building that I put, and it's injected with a probability of injecting each tile. So in some cases, it got only half the tiles. In some cases, it got a third of them. In some cases, it got most of them. So this looks like just scattered ruins, right? But it's something that I hand-made, right, with my awesome artistic talent. So whenever possible, let the designer inject handmade content in the procedural pipeline. This is, again, one of those things that the hubris of programming often forbids us from stopping and thinking about how could a human improve this, right? Because we're so excited with what we managed to come up with ourselves. Stitching, pretty basic, made, I think, most popular by Spelunky. How many people are familiar with how Spelunky generates levels? Oh, okay, only a few. So the basic idea here is there are a whole bunch of room templates. There's a room with a ladder, and then there's a room with a ledge, and then a room with the double ladder and the ledge that goes down. And there's a whole bunch of them. And each one of those notes, it connects on the side and it connects down, or it connects up and down and to the right. So basically, the way it works is just picks these random templates and sticks them in and sort of makes a map that can connect and flow together, right? So you're always guaranteed a flow, and they always connect, and the pieces are hand-authored, so they're always kind of good and balanced and they make sense, but they're always appearing infrequently and in different relation to each other. Another thing that they do really nicely is, if you see these transparent tiles here, those are optional tiles. Actually, I think these ones are the optional tiles. So every time this room template appears, it may or may not have any combination of these stones or these stones, just to break up the, oh, I've been in this room before sensation. So for me, that's stitching. This is different than content injection. For me, content injection is generate stuff and then glue, slap on a piece. This is, the generation is the slapping of pieces, right? It's the gluing together of the puzzle pieces. Template instantiation. I don't know what else to call this. So let's say I have some piece of handmade content. I might want that to be able to be rotated, right, when I place it. Well, one of the things you can do is just, like, as you load it, pre-rotate it in memory, so you just have a bunch of, just have 4 versions of it, right? Or if people authored content that can have things that are present or absent, you can generate it both ways. If you don't mind a little bit of the memory, and if it's not a ton of data, which usually anything hand-authored, there's a limit to how much there is, just load all the copies of it, right? Instance them out. You can also instance variations, right? Like you can have rules that say those columns are going to change like this, or they're going to swap these kinds of tiles with these kinds of tiles, and we can just have all those be different instances. So now when I go looking for content, I can say, give me something with water, and it can find this piece, even though it wouldn't have found this piece if the blue is water. Content-less, super simple. This is just the idea of, like, be a data whore. I go and I'll grab 5,000 Irish surnames, and I'll grab 4,000 Chinese female first names or whatever, and just have massive amounts of content. In my Dungeons & Dragons campaign, I have all the dwarves. None of my people in the campaign knew this. All the dwarves had names whose were randomly generated, seeded from Russian names, and all the elves were seeded from French names. So they didn't sound like Russian names, but they had this distinct feel that was very different from the elves. So it's really useful to have just tons and tons of data. And then you can say, oh, I need the name of a spice or the name of a smell. For example, I'm looking at potions. Every potion maybe has a unique scent to it, or has a randomly rolled up scent. So I just pull a scent, a word out of my scent table. Again, this is not rocket science, but I'm always shocked at how often we don't do it. Mad-libs. Pretty simple. You probably remember these from when you're a kid. You have some story that someone wrote, and it's just missing words, but you know what kinds of words need to go in the blanks: adjective, noun, shape, plural noun. All right, so I can have content in my game that's a sculpture of some Greek god, meaning pull a name out of the Greek god list, is in the center of the room, which smells faintly of spice. So right, from that I get these 2 pieces of content. And that's not that exciting until you start adding in variations. So you have variants where you have, I write the same sentence, an inlaid depiction of blank is positioned, is strewn across the floor. and the entire room has a distinct odor of blank. And if I write that now 10 different ways, and I stick in different words in the different places, plus I could have different phrases that could entirely be popped out of it, now I start getting content that doesn't feel samey, right? Abstract compositions, one of my favorite things. Let content people create content at the level of abstraction that they want to. So if I want to design a city that has a sort of Rome-like feel, I might just literally paint, or something else, in yellow, blue, and red to determine where the residential, commercial, and industrial districts are, and then the procedural content will fill that out appropriately, right? So I'm saying, much like with the detailing, procedural detailing, I'm saying put a bunch of grass here, put a bunch of trees here. So I'm just dictating it in broad swaths, right? Much like a film director. Constraints. So this is the idea that you say what you want the content to have. And this marries really well with procedural recipes, which we talked about before. So every residential home must have exactly one kitchen in order to be valid. It must have 0 to 1 garages. It must have between 1 and 2 living rooms, 1 and 3 baths, and 2 and 5 bedrooms, right? And then, of course, we can nest those constraints. And if we're just having simple constraints, we can solve this a number of ways. Like we roll how many rooms we're going to have. Okay, I'm going to have 2 living rooms, 2 baths, and 5 bedrooms. And then I pull those rooms out of content lists, and then I stitch them together. Or I could just start laying rooms until I run out of the budget of these, my limits that I'm allowed to have. And if I get stuck, then I'll just re-roll, right? Maybe use a recipe, or I'll recursively rewind. A nested constraint then would be when you have data that references data that references data that references data. So I can say a village has 5 to 12 houses. Well, what does that mean? Well, here's what a house is. It has 1 kitchen and blah, 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 living rooms. And it has 2 to 5 bedrooms. And a bedroom has 1 to 2 beds, 1 to 2 tables. And a table has a 70% chance of a bedroom item on it. And a bedroom item can be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you just have especially keywords, and they can be arbitrary strings in data, as long as they match some other string in the data, they can look up content and constrain together. So again, we can build this top down and rewind, or however we want to do it. Exemplars, one of my favorite things. So this is the idea that the human provides complete and good content. Well, I'll say 2 ways of doing this. One of them is I write sentences. I write 3 sentences down, and then I tell the algorithm, give me more sentences like this, right? And that's what a Markov chain is really good at. Has anyone ever used Markov chains before? Okay, a couple of people. And I'll show you in a minute kind of how that works. And then another nice way of doing exemplars is to say, oh, I want this here, this here, this here. I'm just going to paint in parts of the content. And that could be maps, or again, it could be, all I know is that there's a wizard who's level 15, and there's a girl named Susan, and there are twin puppies. Okay, you go fill out the rest of the details of this village, right? So you can have an algorithm fill in the rest of the bits, but it's not just procedural detailing where it's just like shading in the grass and the boring parts. This is, if there's a girl named Susan, then she has to have parents, alive or dead, so who are they? So something that can figure out what are all the connective tissue, what are all the pieces of content, and how do they relate to each other, and it will build something valid based on what you started it with. I'll show you how that works here in a second. Okay, so Markov chains. The idea is you feed it corpus data. This is super lame example. I am cold and I am wet and I live in this box. It builds a table of relationships, what follows what. So I can lead to am or live. In fact, there would be a 2 next to the am right here. In other words, that occurred twice, right? So that might be twice as likely to follow I. Am can lead to cold can lead to and. and can lead to wet or I, et cetera, et cetera. So then that can generate I am cold and I live in this box, or I live in this box, right? And this is really exciting when you are a data whore like me, and you download the Gutenberg, Project Gutenberg Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare and whatever, and you just tell it, make more Shakespearean stuff, make more biblical sounding stuff. And it will, right? It'll make these massive tables. Markov chains, favorite tool. Wave function collapse. This is super awesome. Is anyone familiar with this? Oh, okay. This is the idea that everything is in a sort of quantum state of uncertainty. In fact, the term comes from quantum mechanics. That we don't know, and this is a Sudoku-like game, so I don't know whether this cell is a 1, 2, 3, or 4 yet. I don't know whether this is a 1, 2, 3, so it has all those possibilities. However, if this is a 2, the rule in this game is you can't have any other 2s in the same row or column, so now these possibilities of 2s got eliminated, right? So effectively, what wave function collapse does is you place some content, like this 2, and then that is going to say, well, that's the one kitchen you have, so I guess there can't be any other kitchens because you already placed it. We crossed that off the list. And so now as it's placing other things, it knows, okay, there are these rooms in these positions, and I know these are the possibilities for this room, these are the possibilities for this room. And that can be based on simple things like count, right? Like I can only have one kitchen and I already have it. Or it can be based on proximity, that the master bedroom is never directly connected to the garage, just a rule, a constraint. And so once I place down the master bedroom, then I know that all of the rooms that it connects to must not be the garage. So I cross the garage possibility off. And I basically collapse the possible quantum states into known information until I either solve it or I reach some impasse where I can't solve it, and then I have to rewind or start over. And then training. There are a lot of cool algorithms. Neural networks are back and better than ever and all this stuff. One of my favorite things is just to use a simple genetic algorithm. The basic 30-second summary is I have a random thing. I make the thing do stuff. I rate how well it does. I make another random thing. I make it do stuff. I rate how well it does. I have 1,000 things. I rate them all. I say, everyone, the 10 people who did the best, you can stay. Everyone else can go. You 10, I'm going to keep. Plus, I'm going to take your attributes and crossbreed them with each other and make new mutations of you. Now go. And so I do another generation and another generation. It gets better and better and better. In fact, my noise function that I use for all these demos, all the constants in it, I evolved from a genetic algorithm. But with genetic algorithm, normally you want to run millions of generations, or at least dozens or thousands of generations, to get evolution that's better and better and better. But you don't have to do that. You can use simple human selection as the fitness function in a genetic algorithm, meaning scoring what's best. So I can effectively do something like this. So I say, well, I'm trying to pick what's the best. This is for a Rubik's Cube, 660 Rubik's Cubes in the video game museum that I built. I built the exhibit there. And each time we have a different picture, we want to figure out what's the best Rubik's Cube layout for it. So I can just pick a face, and out of all these, if I don't like them, I just keep clicking other ones. If I see one I like, I can pick on that. So I can quickly zoom in and find content that I want. And this is super useful for level designers. If they see like what villages you like, just show me a random village, and they can say, I don't know about this, but I like that house, and they can lock that house down. And now the village regenerates, but that house is locked, right? So let me evolve and pick stuff based on me being the fitness function in a genetic algorithm. And then the last idea is one I'm big fan of, but the idea is that anything you generate in general can be used in turn to be an influencer for something else you're going to generate, right? So if generation data among the things generated is seeds or other contexts or constraints for the next piece of content, then you can have your generators feeding your generators feeding your generators. And Innes McKendrick does an awesome job explaining this in his 2014 ProcJam talk, which I highly recommend. He's on the No Man's Sky team. And that is all I have on this. Thank you.